The drone feed was a study in gray geometry, a cold digital rendering of a kill box. From the sterile quiet of the Tactical Operations Center, Colonel Marcus Reed watched the geometry tighten. The canyon walls of the Zarin Valley were too sheer, unforgiving lines squeezing a dozen green icons, SEAL Team 3, callsign Trident, into a fatal bottleneck. Red icons, more than 3 times as many, swarmed the ridgelines, their positions spitting pixels of muzzle flash that corresponded to the panicked, static-laced comms chatter filling the room. They had walked into a perfectly sprung ambush. They had been pinned for 47 minutes. Reed knew that in another hour, when the sun dipped below the western ridge, it would become a massacre. Air support was a fantasy. A freak sandstorm had socked in every airfield within 300 miles. A ground-based quick reaction force would be crawling through the same treacherous mountain passes that had led Trident into this trap. They wouldn't make it in time. The room was thick with the impotent rage of men watching their brothers die on a screen. In the corner, almost a part of the shadows cast by the humming server racks, Sergeant Anya Sharma monitored the medical channel. She was a combat medic, attached to the command element for this deployment cycle, but she hadn't spoken a word since the first shots were fired. She just listened to the strained breathing and the grunted calls for morphine, her face a stoic mask. The team's corpsman was down. 2 others were confirmed Kia. 4 more were wounded, 1 critically. Her hands rested on the console, still, but her knuckles were white. The tactical problem was one of angles and exposure. The enemy held the high ground on both sides, a perfect L-shaped ambush that offered Trident no viable cover and no path for retreat. They were trapped behind a small outcrop of rock that was slowly being chipped away by heavy machine gun fire. Reed slammed a fist on the table, the sound barely registering over the controlled chaos. "Get me a solution," he growled to the room at large. "Anything. I need to relieve pressure on that position now." His operations officer, a young, eager major, pointed to a topographical map. "Sir, we have no assets. The enemy controls every approach." Sharma stepped out of the shadows. Her voice was quiet but cut through the noise like a shard of glass. "There is one approach they don't control." All eyes turned to her. She pointed a single, steady finger at the screen, at the sheer, vertical cliff face on the northeastern side of the canyon. No one would expect a climber there. An overwatch from that position could break the crossfire. Reed stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "An overwatch? Sergeant, it would take a mountain goat to make that ascent, and we don't have time to insert a sniper team." "You don't need a team," Sharma said, her gaze unwavering. "You need 1 rifle. I can make the climb." A derisive snort came from the major. "You're a medic." Reed waved a dismissive hand, his attention already back on the screen where another green icon had just flickered to red. "Sergeant, with all due respect, your station is monitoring casualties, not planning tactical insertions. Get back to your post." He didn't see the flicker of cold fire in her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. He had already turned away, his mind grappling with the impossible. Anya Sharma didn't return to her console. She turned and walked out of the TOC, her movements economical and silent. The dismissal was familiar. It was the same flat, unseeing look she had received from countless officers who saw a medic's patch and nothing more. It never enraged her. It focused her. She knew what the drone feed didn't show. The subtle shifts in the wind that gusted through the canyon, the way the late afternoon sun would create long shadows the enemy could hide in, the precise ballistic solution required to arc a 338 Lapua Magnum round over 1,000 meters in thinning mountain air. She knew this because she had been raised in the shadow of the Himalayas, taught by a man who treated windage and elevation like a language. Her father had been a legend in the Gurkha Rifles, a man who could hit a moving target from a mile away in a snowstorm. He had taught her that a rifle was not a weapon of aggression, but an instrument of absolute resolution. It solved problems that words and plans could not. In the armory, she ignored the rows of standard-issue M110s. She went to a locked case in the back, a relic from a previous unit's deployment. Inside lay an M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, its chassis scarred and worn, the finish rubbed smooth in the places a hand and a cheek would rest. She knew this rifle. She had zeroed it herself on a windswept range in Nevada, a favor to the unit's armorer who knew her reputation from a quiet word passed by an old Delta operator. Her hands moved with a fluid, ingrained certainty, checking the action, seating the magazine, attaching the suppressor. She didn't bother with the standard-issue optics, instead pulling a canvas-wrapped scope from her own go-bag. It was older, heavier, but the German glass was flawless. As she worked, Master Sergeant Kane, the TOC's senior NCO, appeared in the doorway. He was a grizzled veteran with eyes that missed nothing. He had seen her walk out, had seen the set of her jaw. He didn't speak. He simply watched her assemble the rifle system with the focused grace of a surgeon. On the sleeve of her fatigues, almost hidden by a fold of fabric, was a small, circular patch she'd sewn on herself. It depicted a coiled serpent, a Vritra, the mythological dragon of drought slain by Indra's thunderbolt. It was her father's emblem. Kane's eyes lingered on it for a moment. He walked over to the comms locker, pulled out a tactical radio and a spare battery, and set them on the bench beside her. "The East Ridge is a 40-minute drive and a 2-hour climb," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The colonel doesn't need to know until you're in position." Sharma paused, her fingers tightening around a fresh magazine. She gave him a short, sharp nod. It was all the acknowledgement he needed. Gearing up was a silent ritual. She stripped away her medic's vest, replacing it with a minimalist plate carrier and a chest rig holding 3 extra magazines, a laser rangefinder, and a Kestrel weather meter. She packed a small assault pack with water, a climbing rope, and her data book. The rifle was her primary burden, its weight a familiar comfort across her back. Every piece of gear was placed with purpose, every buckle tightened with an economy of motion that spoke of endless repetition. The drive to the foothills was a bone-jarring ride in a stripped-down Humvee, Kane at the wheel. Neither of them spoke. The roar of the engine and the whine of the wind were the only sounds. He dropped her at the base of a jagged rock spire that looked more like a wall than a path. It was the beginning of her ingress. The climb was a vertical agony. The rock was sharp, crumbling shale that bit into her gloves and threatened to give way with every step. The wind whipped through the passes, a physical force that tried to tear her from her holds. She moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a seasoned mountaineer, testing each handhold, wedging her boots into unseen cracks. This was not about speed. It was about silence and certainty. The enemy would have sentries on the gentler slopes, the obvious approaches. No one would be watching the cliff face. It was considered impassable. Her lungs burned in the thin air, her muscles screaming with the strain. Sweat pasted her hair to her forehead, stinging her eyes. She ignored it all. Her focus narrowed to the next 20 feet of rock, the next solid hold. This was her true element. Not the sterile hum of the TOC, but the raw, visceral negotiation between will and gravity, between her body and the unyielding mountain. 2 hours later, bruised, bleeding, and caked in dust, she pulled herself over the final ledge. She was 1,000 feet above the canyon floor, a ghost on the ridgeline. She crawled into a shallow depression between 2 boulders, a natural sniper's nest shielded from view. The world spread out below her. Through her binoculars, she could see it all. The desperate huddle of the SEALs, the muzzle flashes from the enemy positions, the merciless geometry of the kill box. She unslung the M2010, the metal cold against her cheek. She deployed the bipod, the legs clicking softly into place. She chambered around, the sound a small, perfect punctuation in the howling wind. Then she put her eye to the scope. The chaos below resolved into cold clarity. She saw the heavy machine gun nest that was doing the most damage, a Russian-made DSHK hammering away at the SEAL's cover. 3 men manned the position. She saw the spotters calling out targets, the teams maneuvering to flank the trapped Americans. She took out her Kestrel, held it up for a moment. The wind was gusting erratically, shifting direction as it funneled through the canyon. The distance was 1,150 meters. She dialed the elevation into her scope, held 2 mils for wind, and settled the crosshairs on the gunner. The world shrank to the circle of her scope. The gunner's face, the ejected brass, the plume of dust kicked up by his weapon. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate until she could feel the faint beat in her fingertips. In the space between heartbeats, she pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked, a solid, predictable shove against her shoulder. For a fraction of a second, she lost the target in the recoil, but her eyes were already reacquiring it. The heavy machine gun fell silent. The stream of tracers ceased. One of the crew members looked at the gunner, who had slumped forward without a sound, a dark hole appearing in his helmet. Before the second crewman could react, Sharma had already worked the bolt, ejected the spent casing, chambered a new round, and adjusted her aim. Another breath, another squeeze. The second man fell. The third scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere to go. A third shot ended the threat permanently. Down in the canyon, SEAL Captain Thorne flinched as chunks of rock exploded from the outcrop in front of him. The DSHK had been relentless, forcing them to keep their heads down, unable to move or effectively return fire. And then it just stopped. The sudden silence was more shocking than the noise. "What happened?" his radio man yelled. Thorne risked a look over the rock. The gun was silent, its crew gone. "Where did that come from?" one of his men asked, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. "Air support." Thorne shook his head. "Negative. Skies are soup." His gaze swept the ridges, trying to locate the source. It had to have come from the northeast, an impossible angle. A shot like that, in this wind, from that distance? It wasn't just good. It was supernatural. He keyed his comm Trident 6 to TOC. "Be advised, we have friendly overwatch. Unknown asset has neutralized the enemy HMG." The response from the TOC was laced with confusion. Colonel Reed's voice crackled over the net. "Trident 6, say again? We have no assets in your area. I don't know who it is, but they just saved our asses," Thorne replied, a grim smile touching his lips. "Tell them to keep it up." In the TOC, Reed stared at the screen. Kane stepped up behind him. "It's Sharma, sir. She took the East Ridge." Reed spun around, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "She did what?" "Without my authorization. Get her on the radio. Now." The comms officer patched her in. Reed grabbed the handset. "Sergeant Sharma, this is Colonel Reed. You identify yourself immediately. What is your status?" Anya's voice came back, as calm and steady as a frozen lake. There was no apology, no explanation. Just a simple, profound statement of fact. "Overwatch established. Designate targets or I will." The enemy, initially thrown into disarray by the loss of their most powerful weapon, began to adapt. They were disciplined fighters, not disorganized militia. Realizing a sniper had entered the field, they ceased firing from static positions. Mortar teams, hidden on the reverse slopes, began to walk rounds toward the SEAL's position, trying to flush them from their cover. At the same time, small teams of hunters began a cautious ascent up the ridges, their movements fluid and practiced, designed to triangulate the sniper's hide. On Sharma's ridge, the first mortar round landed 100 meters short, a dull crump that sent a tremor through the rock. She ignored it. Her focus was on the human threat. She scanned the opposite slope, her scope a roving eye of judgment. She saw a man with a radio, speaking urgently into his handset, pointing towards the SEALs. He was a coordinator, an officer. She adjusted her dials, the clicks of the turret precise and audible in the wind. One shot. The man collapsed. The enemy's coordinated fire faltered for a moment. In the TOC, Reed watched this unfold, the handset still clutched in his hand. He was caught in an impossible position. His command had been subverted, his authority disregarded. But the woman on the other end of that radio was single-handedly turning the tide of the battle. The fury in his gut warred with a grudging, nascent respect. "Designate targets," he finally bit out, handing the radio to the operations major. "Give her whatever she needs." The major, his earlier scorn replaced by wide-eyed astonishment, began calling out priority threats. "Overwatch, we have a mortar team, grid 345 to 881. Reverse slope." Sharma didn't respond verbally. 2 minutes later, 3 precisely spaced shots echoed across the canyon. The mortar fire ceased. A new, more immediate threat emerged. A glint of light, high on the western ridge, almost lost in the glare of the setting sun. It was fleeting but unmistakable. The reflection from a rifle scope. They had a counter-sniper. Sharma felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. This was the real test. Everything up to this point had been a matter of calculation and execution against static or slow-moving targets. This was a duel. A conversation between two rifles, where the first to miscalculate would be the last to speak. She immediately shifted her position, crawling 10 feet to her left, placing a thicker section of rock between herself and the enemy shooter. He was good. He hadn't fired, which meant he was patient, waiting for her to make a mistake, to expose herself for a clear shot. She scanned his position, mapping the terrain in her mind. He was dug in behind a cluster of iron-red rocks, a perfect hide with a commanding view of her general area. Her current position offered protection but no line of sight. To take the shot, she would have to move. It was a deadly chess match played out across 1,000 meters of empty air. She unscrewed a spare lens from her pack, a simple piece of coated glass. Holding it at arm's length, she extended it just beyond the edge of her cover, angling it to catch the sun. It was a trick her father had called waking the snake. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then, a puff of dust and rock chips exploded from the boulder just in front of her decoy lens. The enemy sniper had taken the bait. His shot gave her everything she needed. His exact position, the trajectory of his bullet, and, most importantly, a moment of distraction while he worked his bolt to chamber a new round. In that sliver of time, Sharma moved. It wasn't a crawl. It was a fluid, explosive shift. She pivoted on her stomach, bringing the M2010 around the other side of her cover, settling the bipod on a new patch of rock. She already had the firing solution calculated in her head. Her eye found the scope, the crosshairs finding the small patch of shadow where the enemy sniper was concealed. She saw a flicker of movement as he reacquired his own sights. She was already pressing the trigger. The shot was an extension of her will. The bullet crossed the canyon in just over a second. Through the scope, she saw the enemy rifle jerk upwards as if thrown, followed by the limp collapse of its owner. The duel was over. The silence that followed was profound. The elimination of the counter-sniper broke the enemy's spine. They had lost their heavy gun, their commander, their mortar teams, and now their champion. Their coordinated assault dissolved into sporadic, panicked fire. This was the moment. Sharma keyed her radio, her voice cutting through the static. Trident 6, this is Overwatch. Your exfil route is southwest. I have eyes on. Move now. Captain Thorne didn't hesitate. All stations, Trident, we are breaking contact. Move, move, move. The SEALs burst from their cover, laying down a storm of suppressive fire as they fell back. Sharma provided the real cover. Her rifle spoke with a calm, deadly rhythm. She targeted team leaders, radio men, anyone attempting to rally the disorganized fighters. She wasn't just killing. She was dismantling their ability to fight. A team of 3 tried to flank the retreating SEALs. Sharma's rifle barked twice. 2 men dropped. The third dove for cover and stayed there. She guided them through the maze of rock and scrub, her voice a steady, dispassionate presence in their ears. Trident 6, you have 2 tangos in the washout to your left, 150 meters. Suppressing a single shot cracked across the valley. Threat neutralized. Continue southwest. She was a guardian angel with a 338. Her vantage point giving her a god's eye view of the battlefield. She stayed in her nest, firing methodically, until the last SEAL had disappeared over the southern ridge, their wounded in tow. She watched for another 10 minutes, ensuring no enemy followed. Then, and only then, did she pack her rifle, coil her rope, and melt back into the mountain. The first man to greet the returning SEALs at the base perimeter was Colonel Reed. He watched as they stumbled in, exhausted and battered but alive. Every one of them, Captain Thorne, his face grimed with sweat and cordite, strode past the colonel without a word. He walked directly into the TOC, where Sharma was now standing, methodically cleaning the M2010, its components laid out on a clean cloth. The room fell silent. Thorne looked at her, his eyes conveying a depth of gratitude that words could never touch. He reached up, tore the trident patch from his own shoulder, a sacred symbol of his team, and placed it gently on the table in front of her rifle. He gave a short, sharp nod and walked out. The gesture hung in the air, a profound statement of honor and acceptance. Reed watched it all, his expression unreadable. Master Sergeant Kane quietly approached and slid a thin personnel file onto the console in front of him. Reed opened it. It was Sergeant Anya Sharma's record. Standard commendations for a medic, a clean service history. But tucked into the back was a supplementary addendum classified. It detailed her early life, her father's service with the Gurkhas, and his legendary status as a sniper instructor for Joint International Forces. It listed her unofficial but documented performance in advanced marksmanship courses, where she had broken every record. And at the bottom, a single note from a former Special Forces commander. Her skill set is generational. Call sign Vritra. The name clicked in Reed's memory. Vritra, the serpent, the dragon, the ultimate obstacle, slain by a single, precise thunderbolt. He closed the file. He walked over to where Sharma was reassembling her rifle, the lockwork clicking together with practiced precision. She didn't look up. "Sergeant," Reed said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all authority, holding only a deep, raw respect. He extended his hand. Sharma paused her work. She looked at his offered hand, then up at his face. She wiped her own hand on her trousers and took his. The handshake was firm, brief, a silent acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid. Later that night, the armory was silent and cool. The M2010 was back in its case, clean and oiled, resting in the darkness. Anya Sharma stood alone in the quiet space, the faint scent of gun oil hanging in the air. She held the trident patch Thorne had given her. She ran her thumb over the embroidered trident, a symbol of a brotherhood she had, for one afternoon, been a part of. She looked down at the scarred knuckles of her right hand, the hand that had held the rifle steady, the hand that had pulled the trigger. There was no triumph in her expression, no pride. There was only the quiet stillness of the mountain after the storm, the profound and lonely peace that comes after a problem has been resolved. She carefully tucked the patch into her pocket, turned off the light, and walked out, leaving the rifle and the ghosts of the canyon behind her.